Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Claire had gone through many moments in her life where she believed she had already weathered the harshest storms, where the scars of her past and the battles she had fought both within and outside the walls of the Newman family legacy had left her with an iron shell that nothing could crack. But as she stood frozen, her eyes locked on the glossy image in her trembling hands, the photograph of Holden and Audra standing side by side in their wedding attire, smiling as though the world belonged to them. The breath caught in her throat and a ringing silence roared in her ears, louder than any argument, louder than any explosion of secrets she had endured before, because this was not just a picture, it was a revelation, a dagger disguised as a happy memory, and the weight of it threatened to collapse everything she had been told, everything she had trusted, and everything she thought she had finally begun to build for herself, for her son, and for her fragile sense of belonging. The details of the photo seemed to burn into her mind. The way Holden's hand rested possessively on Audra's waist, the glittering ring on her finger that sparkled with cruel finality, the way their faces radiated triumph instead of love, as if they were not simply two people united in matrimony but co-conspirators in a game so dangerous that one wrong move could unravel the careful fabric of deception and alliances strung through Genoa City and beyond, and Claire's heart hammered with the realization that this photo was not meant to be seen by her, that it was a relic of a secret union kept hidden for a reason, and that reason was likely darker than she dared to imagine, because Holden had always presented himself as the charming outsider, the man with a veneer of sincerity that masked his true ambitions, and Audra, Audra, who had slithered her way through power plays and boardroom manipulations with the cunning of a serpent and the allure of a siren, now revealed not as a rival working in isolation but as half of a calculated duo who had legally bound themselves together in vows that were less about love and more about dominance, leverage, and the dismantling of those who stood in their path. And as Claire's fingers clenched the edges of the photograph, her mind raced with images of the consequences, the fragile house of cards built on lies and half-truths beginning to sway under the weight of this one piece of undeniable proof, and she understood with an icy certainty that if this picture fell into the wrong hands, or perhaps even the right ones, it would ignite chaos that no one, not even the most powerful Newmans or Abbotts, could contain. She remembered flashes of whispered conversations she had once overheard, Audra's sly smirks when she thought no one was watching, Holden's inexplicable absences that had always been brushed aside with convenient excuses, and suddenly the timeline snapped together in her head like puzzle pieces forming a sinister portrait, and with that clarity came dread, because the story she thought she had been living, the narrative where she was slowly healing, slowly trusting, slowly anchoring herself to something resembling stability, might have all been part of a script written by Holden and Audra themselves, their marriage the central secret that had allowed them to pull strings, to manipulate situations, to pit ally against ally while they remained hidden in plain sight. And Claire realized that the shock that seized her chest was not just personal betrayal but the dawning understanding that this revelation had the power to topple more than her fragile trust. It could collapse the entire plot that had been painstakingly woven around business empires, personal vendettas, and the delicate alliances that kept Genoa City from erupting into outright war. Because once the truth of Holden and Audra's wedding surfaced, nothing would remain the same, friendships would fracture, enemies would gain dangerous ammunition, and those who thought themselves untouchable would suddenly find the ground crumbling beneath their feet. And in that moment Claire's hands shook so violently she feared she might rip the photograph in two, yet she couldn't tear her eyes away from it, as though it held not just the faces of two conspirators but the blueprint of a downfall that was about to begin. And with a hollow ache in her chest she asked herself the most terrifying question of all. What if this was always their plan? And what if she herself, Claire Grace, the woman who had fought so hard to reclaim her identity, had unknowingly been nothing more than a pawn moved across their board until the day the wedding photo revealed the checkmate already in motion? Claire's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as the photograph continued to feel heavier than the glossy paper it was printed on, as if every secret, every hidden scheme, and every whispered betrayal in Genoa City had been pressed into this one frozen moment of Holden's arm draped around Audra's waist and the unspoken vow in their joined smiles. And though her mind screamed at her to put the picture down, to burn it, to rid herself of this truth before it had the chance to ruin everything, another part of her, the part that had learned through bitter experience that ignoring the truth only made the eventual fallout more catastrophic, forced her to stare harder, to take in every detail, to etch it into her memory because she knew this wasn't merely about what she saw but about what it meant, and what it could unleash, and the questions that began clawing their way through her thoughts came in relentless succession, each one darker than the last. How long had they been married? How many deals and decisions had been made under the guise of separation when in fact they were united? How many lives, including her own, had been manipulated by their hidden bond, and most disturbingly, who else knew about it and had chosen to remain silent? Because in the world she lived in, silence was never innocent, it was always calculated, always laced with self-preservation or strategic cruelty, and as her heart pounded against her ribs, Claire realized that the walls of deception she had been carefully navigating were far taller and thicker than she had ever imagined, and she could not shake the image of dominoes stacked in perfect alignment, one push away from tumbling into ruin. And this photograph was that push, the kind of revelation that didn't just expose a secret but detonated it, sending shockwaves through every connected storyline, every hidden motive, and every fragile trust she had been trying to build. And she felt her knees weaken as memories came rushing back, Holden offering comfort when she doubted herself, Audra pretending to extend olive branches in moments that now seemed like traps, both of them circling her life with an interest she had mistaken for coincidence or rivalry, but now, in the clarity of hindsight, appeared to be coordination, a choreographed dance meant to draw her deeper into their web, and she could almost hear their laughter, the chilling sound of co-conspirators amused by the ease with which they could play the people around them. And though Claire wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw the photo at someone who could carry this burden with her, she knew she could not, because the instant she revealed she had seen it, the instant she allowed the knowledge to slip past her lips, she would become both a target and a threat, and Holden and Audra, bound together by vows spoken in secrecy, would stop at nothing to neutralize a threat, which left her trapped in the suffocating silence of discovery, knowing too much and unable to act, yet painfully aware that doing nothing could be just as dangerous as doing the wrong thing, and the thought struck her like ice in her veins. The entire plot, the carefully laid schemes that had been brewing in boardrooms, the manipulations over corporate takeovers, the whispered promises of loyalty that had stitched together unlikely alliances, was hanging by a thread, and if that thread snapped, if this photo made its way into circulation, everything would collapse, not in small fractures but in a catastrophic implosion that could bury reputations, destroy empires, and possibly even put lives at risk, because secrets like this didn't just break hearts, they started wars. And as Claire sank into the nearest chair, clutching the photograph so tightly her knuckles blanched, she knew she was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the decision of whether to guard this secret or expose it would determine not just her future but the future of everyone who had unknowingly been caught in the orbit of Holden and Audra's dark, united ambition, and for the first time in years, Claire felt the overwhelming weight of power in her hands. The power to collapse the plot or to keep it stitched together a little longer, and the knowledge that either choice would come at a price so steep she wasn't sure she was ready to pay it. Yet deep down she sensed the collapse had already begun, because once a truth like this was seen, it couldn't be unseen, and the cracks in the foundation were already spreading, whether she admitted them aloud or not. Claire sat there, the photograph trembling in her hand as though it had absorbed the chaos roaring through her body, and the longer she stared at Holden's face beside Audra's, the more she realized that the image itself was less a snapshot of happiness and more a portrait of strategy, because Holden's eyes, once soft in memory, now glimmered with something she recognized only too late: control, calculation, and a dangerous sort of certainty that belonged to a man who thought he had already won. And Audra's smile, dazzling to anyone else, now looked like the smug grin of someone who believed she had secured her crown without lifting a sword, and the realization cut Claire so deeply she nearly doubled over, because it meant she had been moving through her life like a ghost in someone else's play, her lines written, her entrances and exits dictated not by chance or by her own healing choices but by two people whose union had been concealed like a loaded weapon, and she thought of every conversation where Holden had promised she could trust him, every time Audra had pretended they were rivals on opposite ends of ambition, and she wanted to claw at her own skin as if she could rip their lies off her like a suffocating cloak, yet she sat frozen, trapped by the knowledge that this wedding photo was not simply a secret union but the fuse to a bomb waiting to detonate in Genoa City, and her thoughts whirled toward the fallout that would come once the truth surfaced. Victor Newman, already wary of Audra's slippery allegiances, would see in an instant the double-edged threat of her binding herself to Holden, and the patriarch would not hesitate to crush them both with the ruthless precision he reserved for enemies who dared cross Newman territory. Nikki, who had fought so hard to protect Claire after the damage her past left behind, would feel the sting of betrayal all over again, her maternal defenses sharpened into suspicion of every ally, perhaps even of Claire herself, if she faltered in explaining how she had stumbled upon this secret. And Victoria, who had once seen Audra as both a protégée and a rival, would recoil at the realization that while she had been strategizing to protect her daughter and her empire, Audra had already slipped past her guard, not as a lone wolf but as half of a power-wielding pair that threatened Newman's empire at its core. And Claire's pulse quickened because she knew that in this town, secrets didn't stay secrets for long, and when the truth inevitably bled into the open, Holden and Audra's wedding would be more than a scandal. It would be a declaration of war, tearing apart alliances, driving wedges between those who had reluctantly joined forces, and giving fuel to those who had been waiting, silently, for their chance to seize control. And yet, as Claire tried to steady her breathing, she knew that revealing what she had seen wasn't a simple matter of holding up the photograph and speaking the words, because in Genoa City, every truth came with a cost, every revelation became a weapon, and she could not decide which terrified her more, the idea of keeping this secret until it poisoned her or the idea of unleashing it and watching the entire fragile plot collapse like glass shattering on marble, sharp, irreversible, and dangerous to everyone who touched it. And in that excruciating silence she forced herself to imagine scenarios. Like pages of a story flipping too quickly to grasp. One where she confronted Holden directly and watched his mask slip into something far darker. Another where she handed the photo to Victor and watched him set into motion a scorched earth campaign that left no one standing. And still another where she told no one, burying the knowledge until it rotted inside her, only to one day watch the secret emerge through someone else's lips and be branded a coward for her silence. And as she clenched the photo tighter, feeling the slick paper threaten to crumple, she whispered to herself words that sounded both like a vow and a curse, that once you saw the truth, you could never return to the safety of ignorance. And no matter which path she chose, the collapse was already in motion, because foundations cracked the moment their deepest secrets were unearthed, and Genoa City had never been built on stone but on shifting sands of loyalty, ambition, and betrayal, sands that Holden and Audra had just set aflame with the fire of their hidden vows. Claire's chest rose and fell with uneven rhythm, each breath like shards of glass scraping against her ribs as she clutched the photograph tighter, unable to look away, unable to release it, because the glossy image had become more than paper, more than ink. It was a mirror reflecting the twisted reality she had stumbled into. And the longer she stared, the more her body trembled under the knowledge that Holden and Audra's wedding was not simply a union of two ambitious souls but a binding contract forged in secrecy with the deliberate intention of rewriting destinies, toppling legacies, and seizing control of empires built over decades. And the realization made her stomach twist violently, because this meant every step she had taken since returning to Genoa City, every ounce of healing she believed she had claimed for herself, every fragile bond she had fought to mend, may have been nothing more than the backdrop of their plan, a chessboard on which her every move had been anticipated, her every weakness exploited, her every moment of hope twisted into another layer of deception, and she hated herself in that moment for ever believing Holden's warmth, for ever falling for Audra's feigned rivalries, because now, staring at their triumphant faces frozen in time, she understood that their smiles weren't born from love but from the smug satisfaction of predators who had already secured their prey, and Claire's mind reeled with the potential devastation that could erupt if this photograph slipped into the wrong hands. Victor Newman, whose empire was always a fortress built on vigilance and unrelenting power, would not take kindly to discovering that two of the city's most cunning manipulators had legally united under his nose, and his retaliation would be swift, merciless, and absolute, the kind of retaliation that left not only careers in ruins but lives forever altered. Victoria, her mother, who had clawed her way back from betrayal after betrayal, who had struggled to rebuild trust in her family while protecting her daughter, would see Audra's duplicity as the ultimate insult, and her rage, sharpened by maternal instinct, would drive her into a battle she might not survive. Nikki, who had only just begun to accept Claire as part of her family, who had fought her own demons with an iron will, would once again be thrown into the storm, her sobriety and stability tested by a revelation that threatened to shatter her world all over again, and Claire couldn't bear the thought of being the one to deliver that shattering blow, yet she knew with a gut-deep certainty that this secret was a ticking bomb, one that could not be buried forever, because Genoa City had a way of digging up its darkest truths at the worst possible moments. And the question wasn't if the secret would come out but when, and more terrifyingly, who would wield it first, because in this town, a secret wasn't just a revelation, it was currency, it was a weapon, it was the difference between survival and obliteration, and if Holden and Audra's marriage were exposed strategically, it could dismantle not only the Newmans but the Abbotts, the entire business and personal fabric that held this city together, and Claire's mind burned with images of boardroom wars, of family dinners turned into battlefields, of trust fractured so completely it could never be repaired, and she felt herself suffocating under the weight of a choice she had never asked for, never wanted, but one she could not escape. Because she held the photograph, she had seen the truth, and now she carried the responsibility of deciding whether to remain silent and allow Holden and Audra to continue manipulating everyone, or to expose the marriage and trigger a collapse so violent it might leave nothing standing in its wake. And as her trembling hands lowered the photograph into her lap, her thoughts spiraled into darker corners, into questions that scraped at her sanity. Had they orchestrated this from the beginning? Had she been lured back into her family's orbit not for redemption but as a pawn in their cruel theater? Had they whispered her name in their private vows, promising not love but power over her life, her choices, her fragile heart? And she nearly cried out as the paranoia took root, because it all made sense now, the convenient timing of Holden's comfort, the suspicious precision of Audra's provocations, the subtle ways in which they had nudged her deeper into entanglements she thought were hers to control. And the bitterness rose in her throat like bile, because she realized she had never been in control at all, and the fury mingled with grief until it became a storm she couldn't contain, tears pricking her eyes as the ringing silence around her grew deafening, and she whispered into the empty room words she couldn't take back. What if it was always me they wanted to break? And the sound of her own voice startled her, cracked and broken, because it was the voice of a woman realizing she had been standing on quicksand all along, and now, with this photograph, the ground had given way entirely, plunging her into a free fall of doubt, rage, and fear that threatened to consume her. And yet, beneath the raw ache of betrayal, a different fire began to flicker, one born not of despair but of defiance, because if Holden and Audra had truly believed she would remain there, pawn forever, if they had underestimated the strength she had forged through years of suffering and survival, then perhaps this photograph was not only a weapon against her but a weapon she could wield against them. And though the thought terrified her, though it made her pulse race with the risk of destruction, it also gave her a spark of power she hadn't felt in years, and as she wiped at the hot tears on her cheeks with the back of her shaking hand, she looked again at their smug, triumphant faces, and this time she didn't just see conspirators who had written her into their play, she saw enemies, and though she was still standing at the edge of the precipice, still teetering between silence and revelation, she knew with bone-deep certainty that one way or another, this secret would not remain theirs to keep, and when it finally erupted into the open, it would not only collapse the plot they had built, it might just bury Holden and Audra beneath the ruins of their own ambition.